A U.S. spacecraft is on the moon for the first time in 50 years. Officials confirming Odysseus touched down near the South Pole, though not completely upright. The spacecraft reported to have caught a foot in the surface and tipped over on its side. The company behind the launch saying most of the scientific instruments it's carrying are still in a position to work. And for more on this, we're joined by the one and only Bob McDonald. He's CBC's national science commentator, host of CBC's Quirks and Quarks. Great to see you, Bob. I imagine you watching this, holding your breath, and then hearing that it actually touched down, breathing a sigh of relief, but now hearing that it's on its side. What do you think about this landing? What are you worried about?
Well, Linda, it was an interesting experience because as it was coming down, I thought, wow, everything's working just fine. Then all of a sudden they lost contact with it. And I went, uh-oh, it's always that last meter that gets you. You know, you can get all the way to the moon and then at the very last second you can trip and fall over. And this had happened to a Japanese robot that tried to land just recently. It did the same thing. It tripped and it ended up upside down. So that was what was going through my mind. But eventually, they did reestablish contact with it. So it wasn't a perfect landing, but at least they're on the surface.
Yeah, and there are some instruments, and as we say there, that the instruments we're hearing, most of them are still able to carry on the work that they were sent there to do. I think there was some lasers or something like that. Can you explain to us what's on this lander, and what it was there for, and how likely it is that it's still working?
Well, they know it is still working. There's about 12 different instruments that are on there. And the one that I find really interesting is a Canadian experiment. Most people don't realize that Canada is part of this project. We were involved in the navigation on how to find the landing site and come down. And there's a camera on it. There's a little camera that is not going to actually look at the moon. It's supposed to look up and take pictures of the Milky Way and astronomical objects and even look back at the Earth and then send those pictures back to the Earth to see if it would be possible to put a telescope at the south pole of the moon. But now that this thing is lying on its side, I don't know which way that camera is pointing and whether or not they'll be able to do that. But I hope that works. The point is, Canada's part of it, just as we always have been. We don't build big rockets and we don't make a lot of noise, but we do build precision instruments, and we were part of this team as well.
And, where this landed as well, I know this was a big part of how significant this is. What is it that you're hoping that science will be able to glean from this operation, and specifically where this lander touched down?
Yeah, it landed very close to the south pole of the moon, and that is a special target of future missions, including some of the human missions to the moon, because there are places at the bottoms of craters that never see the sun. At the South Pole, the sun is very, very low on the horizon. So if you have a bowl, the sunlight doesn't get into it. And they're permanently shaded. They're very, very cold. And it's believed that there's ice there. Now, on the moon, ice is a valuable, valuable resource because it can provide water for people who are there, but it can also provide rocket fuel because water is made of hydrogen and oxygen. And when you separate that out, that's rocket fuel. So ice is going to be like gold. People are going to be mining it, which raises some interesting questions. Supposedly nobody owns the moon, but are we going to have mineral right issues there in the future? But that's why they're going to the South Pole, to find out how much ice is there and how it can be used.
Now, we talked a little bit about some of the science that's on board here, some of that payload and the science that they're hoping to accomplish here. But let's talk about this private partnership with NASA. NASA has $118 million riding on this. They're paying Intuitive Machines that much money. What's the benefit to NASA of this kind of private partnership when we look forward into sort of the next frontier of space exploration?
Well, from NASA's point of view, this is a really cheap way to go to the moon. $100 million might sound a lot to us, but to the space program, that's penny change. Their normal way of going into space is to use giant big rockets like the one that's going to carry our Canadian astronaut Jeremy Hansen, the big SLS that has only flown once. When that thing flies, it costs $4 billion just to get off the ground and go to the moon. So here they are using the private sector, which can build rockets much cheaper and get up into space with the instruments like SpaceX. SpaceX flies for 10 times less than what NASA does because everything's under one roof. It's a smaller team. They build their own rockets, whereas NASA usually has to employ people from all over the country to build their rockets. It's the sort of a make work project. So it's two different ways, and NASA's now just a paying customer on the private providers like SpaceX, soon Blue Origin and these other companies. So if it's a cheaper way to go, I'm all for it.
Bargain basement deal there, as you say, Bob. Now that we know that it's there, on its side or not, what are you going to be watching for now as we go forward with this mission?
Well, the one thing I'm looking forward to is another little camera that they have on board that was supposed to pop out just before it landed, turn around, and give us some pictures of the spacecraft actually coming down and landing, which we'd never seen before. Well, that didn't happen during the landing, but they think they can still pop it out and let it go a little distance away and look back and see this thing lying on its side on the moon so we can get a picture of what it's really like. So that's the first thing that I'm looking forward to. And then after that, well, let's see what happens as we continue with not only robots, but people to the moon. Don't forget that Jeremy Hansen is going to go there. He's not going to land, but he's going to go and see the far side of the moon and have both the moon and the Earth in the same frame out his window. That's going to be very interesting.
And I'm sure Jeremy Hansen watching this as well, very carefully as you have been. Bob McDonald, always a pleasure to talk to you. Thanks for explaining this for us today.
Thank you, Linda. It's always my pleasure.